Hey, everybody, thank you for listening. This is episode 137 of Stand Up. Joining me today, constitutional law professor, Georgia State University, Professor Eric Segall, talking about the latest Supreme Court decision on abortion. Then I'll talk with veteran Paul Rieckhoff about the bounty on American troops that Russia put forward and that the president ignored. And finally, I've got my friend Bill B down in DC about DC statehood and more. I'm Pete Dominic. Time to stand up with me right now. Hey guys, welcome to the show. I have three great guests joining me today, and I want to get right to it. I want to thank all of you for checking out the podcast, subscribing, giving a rating to, and hopefully getting a paid subscription to. I cannot do this without your support. 5 days a week. It is almost midnight here on the East Coast, and I'm still trying to wrap up today's podcast, and I'm not complaining. I'm just saying this is a full-time gig. I appreciate you supporting me. Go to patreon.com/PeteDominic or click on the paid subscription link in the show notes if you ever look at the show notes. Okay, so a lot happened today in the news, and I've got great experts joining me to talk about what is happening, because here on Stand Up, we have long-form discussions with smart people who know things. I ask the questions, I get great guests, the best guests, if I want to sound so Trumpian, and we learn things. We get enlightened. We help understand the issues that we're dealing with from the best experts. That's basically what I'm trying to do each and every day here. And so yesterday there was a major decision at the Supreme Court about the future of abortion, specifically in Louisiana. But as that state goes, the rest of the country, or at least red states, would have gone. I had a great conversation with Eric Segall about it, and I'll probably talk to him again tomorrow, because the last day of June is the last day for decisions to come down, apparently, so we will learn more tomorrow. But today we've got Eric Segall talking about the abortion case and previewing what's coming. He's on Twitter at eSpinSegall, by the way. He is also a professor of constitutional law at Georgia State University, the author of two excellent books, and it's always great when he joins me, and he joins me now. Okay, so yesterday the Supreme Court struck down a Louisiana abortion law. The case was over a state law requiring doctors performing abortions to also have admitting privileges at nearby hospitals. Now, medical experts, specifically obstetricians and gynecologists, don't think this is necessary. There was no medical or health reason to pass these, quote, admitting laws, but Republicans in Louisiana, as well as other states, did it to make abortion obsolete in Louisiana. Now, only 2 of the 5 doctors who provide abortions in Louisiana have obtained admitting privileges, one in New Orleans, one in Shreveport, but the one in Shreveport testified that he could not handle the clinic's work alone. So the point is, if the law had gone into effect, a trial judge concluded there would be a single doctor, only one, in a single clinic in New Orleans available to provide abortions in Louisiana. This is the first abortion ruling since President Trump's 2 appointees, Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh, joined the court, and it is a major, major decision for all kinds of reasons, which is why when we have a Supreme Court decision, we always go to the best analyst of it, our favorite legal eagle, Eric Segall. Professor Eric Segall, Georgia State University, joins me now. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Pete. Good to have you. Yeah, it was quite a case today. It's got a lot of implications for a lot of different things.
Stare decisis.
Stare decisis.
That's what I said. I pronounced it perfectly. Stare decisis.
Decisis. Yes.
What does that mean? What is that? The Latin?
It means a lot to lower court judges. And what it means to them is they have to follow the decisions of higher courts. We know that, right? If a trial court rules X, and then if a court of appeals rules Y and reverses X, Y wins. And then the first court has to follow the second court. This case today has 4 liberals voting for abortion rights. No surprise. Everybody knew they would. It had Kavanaugh and Gorsuch, the 2 newest justices, along with Thomas and Alito, voting against abortion rights. That wasn't a surprise. Everyone knew they would. And Justice Roberts, and I think a little bit of a surprise, joined the liberals to strike down this horrific Louisiana law that had no health benefits. That's according to 5 Supreme Court justices, 4 liberals and Justice Roberts, had no health benefits and absolutely made it harder for women to get abortions. So in that sense, abortion rights live for another day. Justice Roberts I think, acted like a real judge today. I don't often say that talking to you, but I think the court was a court today. Good for them. It happens every 30 or 40 years. And abortion rights continue. Now, having said that, Justice Roberts made it very clear in his opinion that nobody asked the court in this case to strike down the Casey decision, which followed Roe, which is the law of the land. So the Casey decision on abortion is the law of the land. Nobody asked the court to overturn it in this case, and Roberts said that. So a lot of my liberal progressive friends are freaking out. I mean, I'm talking about really good law professors saying Roberts has left himself an out to overturn Roe and Casey when the time comes. And they could be right. But here's the thing about Justice Roberts. When he overturned the Voting Rights Act, his most heinous decision ever, he told us 3 years earlier that he might very well do that in a different decision. He said this law is problematic. It's in trouble. Fix it. And Congress didn't fix it, and then he struck it down. When he struck down state laws that treated union dues as free speech and really hurt public sector unions by not letting them collect fees, huge case. Right. He told us twice in advance that he might overturn the case that went the other way. He gave no hint today that Casey's in trouble. In fact, he said, we're applying the Casey test. So it would be a little bit of a change in the way he does things if he were to come back 2 years from now and strike down Casey and start all over again.
All right, real quick, just give us a little background. What did Roe v. Wade decide, and what did Casey decide? Those two decisions.
Roe v. Wade said the right to an abortion is a fundamental right, which is the most highest rights we have, and that before viability, a state basically can't restrict a woman's right to choose in any way. That was Roe. Casey diluted that and said it's no longer a fundamental right. It's a right. It's an important right, but it's not the kind that we talked about in Roe. And this is the key part. States can regulate a woman's right to choose even in the first trimester or anytime, as long as the law does not place an undue burden on a woman's right to choose. And then that's further defined as long as the state doesn't put a substantial obstacle in the way of women seeking abortions. So right now, as we sit here, Pete, there are like a bunch of red states that have said abortion's illegal after the fetus can feel pain, which, depending on what doctor you talk to, is 18 weeks, 20 weeks. Those laws are going to go. Judges are going to strike those laws down. This basically puts the law where it was when Justice Kennedy retired 3 years ago, with one little difference that is not, I want to tell those sophisticated listeners, Roberts did change the way Casey is implemented a little bit. It's highly technical, and I don't think it's going to matter. But Pete, there are major political implications to the case. All
right. Well, the political implications we can talk about, and that'll be your opinion, your interpretation. But I do want to ask about the dissent real quick. In the dissent, which is written apparently by Samuel Alito.
Well, there was Alito dissented, and there's three dissents: Alito, Gorsuch, and Thomas. Yeah.
I'm reading from Adam Liptak in the New York Times. In dissent, Justice Samuel Alito Jr., joined by Justices Clarence Thomas, Neil Gorsuch, and Brett Kavanaugh, wrote that the Louisiana law protects the health and safety of women seeking abortions, and that the requirements for obtaining admitting privileges helps ensure the competence of doctors.
That couldn't be more wrong. Like there's not a sentence that could be more wrong than that. There's no sentence that's more wrong than that. Makes me so mad.
I am the handsomest man in the world.
That's a much more accurate statement. I can explain this, Pete, in about 90 seconds to 2 minutes. Can I do it?
Yeah, please.
All right. This admitting privileges law didn't start in Louisiana. Texas had it, and the court struck it down. It was because red states passed the same laws. That law was also in effect in Wisconsin and Indiana. So my friend, who I've talked about on the show and with you on this podcast a lot, Judge Posner, had the very same case involving an admitting privileges law. Judge Posner is the most fact-specific, fact-oriented, practical judge in America the last 40 years. Trust me on that. Conservative and liberal scholars would all agree on that. He is known as a pragmatist, and he researched the hell out of this issue. And he wrote an opinion showing that this admitting privileges law has zero benefit for women. He wrote an opinion showing that there are outpatient procedures like colonoscopies and that kind of stuff that go on every day by the millions in America that are no more dangerous than abortion, but doctors don't have to have admitting privileges within 30 miles of where they're doing the abortion at a hospital for that procedure. A Texas legislator who passed this very same law in Texas said, we know it doesn't help women. We're just trying to stop abortions. So let's be honest here. This is a law about stopping abortions. It's not a law about protecting women's health. And now we have two opinions by Justice Breyer. The first one, by the way, cribbed Judge Posner's opinion. But we have two opinions by Justice Breyer, one joined by Kennedy when he was on the bench. Now Roberts didn't join Breyer's opinion, but he agreed with a lot of the rationale, which says this law has no benefits. Right. And it doesn't. It doesn't. If a woman leaves an abortion clinic and has an emergency room situation, she's not going to the hospital where her doctor had admitting privileges. She's going to the closest hospital.
Exactly.
And that's a fact.
Right.
And that's a fact.
Right.
So I want your listeners to understand 4 Supreme Court justices signed on to a demonstrably false statement, which is really aggravating and really, I don't mind them changing the law. You know, it's fair for that. In fact, I could be convinced, as you know, if they said abortion is not it's not a right, it's not an important right, states can restrict it, we're going to stay out of it. That's one. I can live with that opinion. In fact, I've written that sentence. What they shouldn't be able to do, though, is say the facts are X when the facts are Y. And it's the facts
so about the medical procedure.
This particular law.
Are there other issues? Because this is an interesting gimmick, a scheme, plot and plan for anti-abortion organizations and movement to come up with. Here's what we'll do. We'll make it impossible. We won't make it outlawed. We won't outlaw abortion. We'll just make it impossible to get an abortion. How will we do that? We'll have to have the doctors have admitting permission privileges. Okay, well, they're not going to be able to do it. No, all right, let's pass that law.
Exactly, and guess what? In Texas and Louisiana, a lot of hospitals, many of which are in Louisiana are run by Catholics, won't give doctors admitting privileges if they perform abortions. So it's a catch-22. You have to get admitting privileges to abortions. You can't get admitting privileges.
The anti-abortion movement
of course.
knew that. This was why it's a scheme and a gimmick and a plot and a story. And they come up with these year after year, and they bring them to one court and the next court and the next court, and they stack those courts with the judges who they know will decide for them. And in this case, they elect Trump, who put at least 2 conservative justices who did decide for them, the anti-abortion movement, but Roberts surprised.
Yes. And so when the Texas case 3 years ago came to the court with exactly the same law, there was a second law in that case, even dumber and less women protective than this one, if less than 0 is a possibility. There was a law that said if you do abortion, Planned Parenthood runs a clinic or any other organization runs a clinic where abortions occur, you have to have the same physical structure as an outpatient surgical center, which in many states, and maybe rightly so, have a lot of requirements for that. It's a whole different set of rules and regulations. The problem
that
is
thing with the widths of the hallway and stuff like that.
Exactly.
And why is that?
And both Breyer and Posner, in different opinions, showed that requirement had no medical benefits either. But it did make it much more expensive for clinics to perform abortions, and that's what they're trying to do. Pete, they've been successful. I mean, right now in Mississippi, there's one abortion clinic. Right now in South Dakota, there's one. There are, I think, 6 states with 3 or less, and like 18 with 5 or less, or something. So that movement has been successful to a large degree. And if you're poor in rural Mississippi or rural South Dakota, getting an abortion is going to be almost impossible.
All right. So now let's take a look at your political analysis, which is different than your legal analysis. Obviously, I think it's all subjective. Subjectable. That's a good word.
Is it a word, though? No, it's not at all.
It is. No.
It's not a word, but I'd like it.
Subjectable should be.
Subjectable.
Anyway, it's all subjective. All political analysis is.
So I was listening to you. See how closely I was listening to you?
Yeah, you were. You do a great job. You're a great man. Great listener. So is what? Basically that this decision empowers Republicans, the anti-abortion movement, and specifically Trump's reelection. It gives him juice. It gives them juice.
let's hold. This is something that on that on podcasts and radio is not something that's normally done. Let's hold two thoughts at the same time. Okay.
I love that phrase. I have to use that more. Yes, because it's not just one or the other.
No, it's not one thing. Yeah. It's not one thing. It's complicated. It's actually complicated.
A lot of things are. Relationships even.
Yes. Especially mine with Sweeney these days. That's a whole different podcast.
That's Eric's dog. Something is amiss.
Yeah. All right. So here's the deal. Two thoughts. On the one hand, there's no question that, for example, Republican fundraisers are very happy about this opinion. There's no question that this helps the Republican Party across the country in local, state, and federal elections. Not just the president. Forget Trump. Down the road, down the line, Republicans raise money on abortion, and specifically the Supreme Court treating abortion this way. And now that Roberts did it, this is the first law he's ever upheld. It's the first abortion law he's ever upheld, other than a technicality in a previous case. But this is the first substantive time he's ever upheld an abortion law. So you're going to hear it. You're going to hear it. You know, Roberts is a traitor. Roberts is a turncoat. And they're going to make money on that. And Trump can now tweet whenever he wants to on gay rights, on immigration, and on abortion, all three things. The court went liberal with Roberts in the majority in all three cases. And this is why we need me reelected, so we can get, when Ginsburg dies, when Breyer retires or dies, you need me to appoint judges, because Roberts is now a liberal and I'm going to appoint conservative judges. So that's going to be huge. I think that's going to be really big. On the other hand, are there people out there who would not have voted for Trump but for abortion? I don't know the answer to that. That's speculative. His base is his base, right? His base is his base. I don't think it's growing. Now, maybe I'm wrong about that. You know more about it than I do. But whatever his base is, I don't think it's growing. Will suburban housewives who are not evangelicals care about abortion? And this, maybe not. I don't think so. That's not so. Maybe it won't have any serious political effect. It is good for people who are pro-choice. And maybe all that's good.
What?
I think on balance, though, Pete, in the long run and on balance, this keeps abortion as a major Supreme Court issue, and that helps Republicans and hurts Democrats.
Well,
just does.
Yes. Attitudes could change.
Yes.
Drastically as we grow older, as the next generation comes up. This issue could at some point no longer be an issue, especially when an abortion is as easy as taking a pill that ends and terminates a pregnancy, which they've developed in some ways already. But why can it not also be true that this equally energizes the pro-choice, I call it, women's movement? Why are we not?
In what sense? Tell me how that energizes.
In terms of, we have to make sure that Trump doesn't get reelected so that he does not appoint another justice who is a sure bet.
Right. That's like Kavanaugh and Gorsuch were sure bets. Right. And they voted that way. Right. They were sure bets and they voted.
Your argument is that this energizes the anti-abortion movement. That's your argument.
Well, it raises money. Money's the big thing for me.
Sure. Well, why isn't the same true of the pro-choice movement?
I'm going to answer your question.
All right.
I would like it to be, right? In the past, I've talked to political people about this. I've talked to people. I don't hold myself out as an expert on this specific issue, though I've studied it with regards to abortion and guns. I have studied it. But leaving that aside, political people tell me that traditionally the left has not been energized to the same degree as the right on abortion. And that makes sense, Pete, because a lot of the right on this is about religion. Really, it's about faith and religion. For the left, it's more of a secular thing. So traditionally, that's been the case. However, I would like to think, here's my positive, optimistic Eric talking. It's been a long ass time since I've been optimistic about anything political. But maybe Trump is so horrific on every level that the left will say it's not an abortion issue. It's a get rid of Trump issue first and foremost. And we'll do everything we can on that, including trying to energize people in every way we can. And now the question I have for you, Pete Dominic, is when Joe Biden, so Hillary Clinton said that overturning Citizens United was a litmus test issue. And of course, not overturning Roe versus Wade, not overturning Casey, is a litmus test. She called it that. When Biden is asked what kind of justices you're going to appoint if you win, what do you think he should say about abortion?
Well, if he's asked specifically about abortion, I'm sure he'll say, I'll choose a justice who has a record of coming down on the side of women's reproductive rights, because
he shouldn't say that. It's the last thing he should say in America. It was a trick question.
Well, then he'll say some kind of anodyne statement about justices and the Constitution.
That's the right answer.
Balls and strikes.
That's the right answer. And you know what?
I don't know if you're right about that.
Hold on. Roberts gave him the ability to do that today. So Roberts' entire separate opinion, which, by the way, is the opinion that counts. There were five. So there's 5 justices who voted to strike down this law. Although 4 of them joined one opinion and only Roberts joined his own opinion, it is the narrowest opinion that counts. And his is the narrowest opinion. So his counts. And it starts and it ends. And the middle is about how you started this phone call. Stare decisis, precedent, following the rule of law.
Right.
So what all Joe Biden has to say is, like Justice Roberts, I'm going to appoint justices who follow the rule of law wherever that takes them, period. That's all he has to say. And he shouldn't say anything else. And he shouldn't say anything.
I'm not sure if that's right or not, but I want to, we'll see. We'll see what he's going to be asked about that, if anybody ever asks him a question again.
I would like him to try to take the Supreme Court out of the discussion. We have too many more important things to worry about. We have the pandemic. We have Russia. We have a horrific economy coming out of the pandemic. You know what, people? Let's make this election about your lives. Now, if you're a woman, you're pro-choice. It's very important. I'm not suggesting that. But the makeup of the Supreme Court, an issue, should not dominate this discussion coming out of a pandemic and likely economic, whatever you want to call it, recession.
Well,
whatever.
The makeup of the Supreme Court is always an issue. You're saying
it's important. Just don't make it top of the list. For 20% of the American people, that's 1/5. It's a lot. The Supreme Court was the most important issue last time. I want that number down to about 5%. And if it is, Biden will win. The lower that number goes, the better chance Biden has of winning. And that's what we want. We want the Supreme Court out of the discussion.
Let me ask you about the remainder of the decisions. I guess Thursday is
tomorrow. They're issuing tomorrow. They're issuing decisions tomorrow, according to the calendar.
Why tomorrow?
Because it's the last day of June.
Okay.
Normally, the last day of June is the end of the term.
So
now, it won't be this year because there's too many cases.
So what's left?
Well, first and foremost, I think, is Trump's tax returns and Trump's financial documents.
That's one case.
DA, the New York District Attorney, and a congressional House subcommittee both want those documents. Every lower court, 6 of them, said they could have them. 4 of them said they could have them, and we'll see what the court does with that. And then, Pete, we don't have time in this segment, I don't think, to go into it. But there is a blockbuster religion case that could change how there is a blockbuster religion case. There are ways to punt that case. The way Roberts is going, I'm hoping he's going to punt it because, so far he's been pretty liberal. There was another case today about separation of powers. You listeners may know that. Roberts was the deciding vote. It was 5-4.
About the striking down the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau? Well,
they didn't strike it down. They left it intact. They just said that the head of it, I'm sorry, it may not have been 5-4. I take that back. I have to go back and look. But no, what they said was, it's an important case. The head of the Consumer Protection Financial Bureau, created after the 2007 economic disaster, to help consumers, theoretically anyway. Elizabeth Warren, I think, is the one with the
guy I can talk about it for hours. I did a lot of segments about it. So important.
Yes, right. So the head of that agency could only be fired for the president for neglect of duty or kind of, not doing his job well, as opposed to serving at the will of the president, which is like the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense. The president has to be able, and I agree with this, the president has to be able to fire his cabinet for no reason, any reason, all reasons, right? That just has to be able to do that. Well, they put the head of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau in that same category and said, he's still there. He's still doing his job. The agency is still open, But if the president wants to fire him for any reason, if it's a him, is it him or her? I don't even know. The president can do that. So it didn't close the agency down or anything. It just said the head of it has to be able to be fired by the president. It's an important decision, but it's not a huge one. The Trump tax return cases are much bigger, of course. And there's a religion case from Montana. I'll just give you the bottom line. There is a chance the Supreme Court will hold that if states help out private schools that are poor and trying to help kids, nonprofit private schools that are non-religious, they also have to help religious schools. Otherwise, you're discriminating against religion. That would be a terrible decision. That has never been the law. It shouldn't.
Why can't you discriminate against religion? Or why would it be discriminated against religion? It wouldn't. So as of today, the law today is you're allowed, if you're New York, if you give money to private schools because you want all kids to get a better education. Now, most of these programs involve poor schools, private schools. But leaving that aside, if you give money or books or computers, whatever, to private schools, you're allowed to give the same thing to religious schools. You don't have to, but you're allowed to. There was a time when you weren't allowed to. I litigated that case at the Department of Justice for 3 years. When the question was, what could you give to private religious schools? And the answer was very little. Then Thomas replaced Marshall. Everything changed. And now if New York wants to help religious schools, it can. But no one has ever argued prior to 5 years ago or 3 years ago that you have to. So Montana had a program that helped private non-religious schools. It didn't want to help religious schools. And that program eventually went away for reasons I don't go into. An issue in the case is do states and cities have to support religious schools if they support non-religious schools? The answer should obviously be no, because of the Establishment Clause, which says Congress and the states shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. There you go.
You want to avoid that, so you say Segal's taxpayer dollars, Segal's an agnostic or an atheist, Segal's taxpayer dollars shouldn't go to fund religious schools. They shouldn't. That's what Thomas Jefferson was all about, the wall of separation, church and state, all that stuff, Madison. That case is before the court, and it could either go away on a technicality, which I've argued it should. It could be decided very narrowly on a technicality, which I said it should, or it could be a big bombshell. The fact that it's coming after the abortion case makes me nervous. Like, they saved their bombshells for last. And Pete, that's a big case. Trust me. It is on the ground. I'm talking about not for you and I to discuss. It is a big case on the ground. 38 states have state constitutional provisions saying federal state taxpayer money cannot go to religious institutions. The court might strike down the laws of all 38 states. Now, I don't think they're going to go that far because that would be so huge, but they could. Well, and the fact they released the abortion case first makes me think,
save time for me tomorrow, then.
You got it, Pete. You got it, friend. Anytime. I have time for you day and night, 24/7.
You're the greatest. At Eastman Segall on Twitter. Follow him now. And are we promoting your new podcast yet, or what are we talking about?
Sure. Can we? I've done one, and I plan to do at least
one episode. We should do a whole hour talking about what your new adventure is. But right now, there's one episode up. And what do you? Where can people find it?
It's called Supreme Myths. And actually, right now, because
it's part of your university, right?
It's the studio is at my school, but it's not my. I mean, make no mistake, this is not the school speaking. I'll get in big trouble for that. This is Segall speaking.
Yeah.
But I hope to have a series of podcasts called Supreme Myths, inviting the most knowledgeable people on the Supreme Court to talk about both the court and law in general. I hope to have most people who disagree with me. That's my plan, if I can get them. And we'll see how it goes. Doing a podcast ended up being very, very different than being a radio guest. I was terrible the first time. But I hope to get better.
So people can find it wherever they find their podcasts? Is that right?
No, not yet. My Twitter feed and Facebook.
Okay. Well, go find the link and watch episode number 1, as always.
But it will be eventually on where podcasts can be got, because you're going to help me do that.
I will help you however you need it, pal. Any way I can promote your voice, your heart, and mind, and your fraught relationship with your dog, apparently.
Yeah, Sweeney. I'm mad at Sweeney right now. He kept me up all night 2 nights ago.
Oh, that's terrible. That's the worst. That's a real reason to not have an animal.
Except he's so cute, I can't blame him.
We'll talk to you hopefully tomorrow.
Thanks, Pete.
Thank you, sir. Eric Segall. Sorry. At Eastspin, Segall, Eric Segall, always great, and we'll probably get him back on tomorrow. I learned a lot. As always, all the details of that very important, very surprising decision from the Supreme Court. Now, I want to go to my conversation with Paul Rieckhoff, which may or may not have included some drinking and some talking about drinking. We were all over the place, Paul and I, but we are old friends and good friends, and we talk quite a bit, and it's the second time he's been on the podcast. Paul and I met when I was at SiriusXM, and he was the founder and executive director of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. I did a segment on the show called Stand Up with a Veteran, where I introduced my audience to a new veteran every week. That was back in 2010, 2011. I did some media training with Iraq and Afghanistan veterans. My former producer, Alfred, and I did down in Washington, D.C., where we helped them storm the Hill. They went up and lobbied Congress for veterans' ideas and concerns and issues and advocacy, and we helped them navigate how to do that. So that was a great honor, and I learned a lot from working with that organization about veterans and the issues that they struggle with, especially this generation of veterans. Paul and I remained friends, and he remained joining me as a guest on my show. You've seen him on CNN and MSNBC. He wrote an awesome book, and let's just jump right into my already underway conversation with Paul, and then a little bit further in, I give him a proper introduction and talk about the issue that I reached out to him for. Eventually, we do get to it, and it obviously has to do with the story about Russia paying the Taliban to kill U.S. troops. Here now is my conversation with Paul Rieckhoff. You should listen to his podcast, Angry Americans. You should follow him on Twitter, at Paul Rieckhoff. Let's do it.
I don't have beer. All I have is Poland Spring Black Cherry.
You're drinking water?
Try not to be an alcoholic. I mean, is anybody trying not to be an alcoholic, or is everyone just giving up now and just resign themselves to being alcoholics?
I think mostly the latter, yeah.
I mean, so how many days a week, how much alcohol consumption determines whether or not you're an alcoholic?
Oh, I think that's a great question, but I don't know if...
I think we're a country of functioning alcoholics, right? Or not functioning alcoholics.
I think it depends on the person. I think some people obviously can handle a lot more. So I don't like that. I don't like that framing. Why don't you just ask me how much I'm drinking?
No, because I can guess. I'm more concerned with how much everyone else in America is drinking, because it's this crowd control shit, like this kind of group think. Like, I actually have to say, okay, I'm not going to drink tonight. And that's kind of hard.
Do you have to say that?
Yes, because I want to fucking drink every night.
I don't have to say that. I just drink every night.
Who doesn't want to drink every night, especially when you work in the media?
Well,
are we recording now?
Yeah, I've been recording all this. But how about this? Moderation. Like, I drink pretty much every night, but I don't drink to excess every night.
Here's something that's interesting that I tried to explain. I have a couple
drinks at least.
I tried to explain something to this to someone in my family. You and I are in a unique situation. You and I and certain other people, we are experiencing the pandemic. We are covering the pandemic, and we're trying to positively influence in our small way the pandemic. That's a unique fucking experience. Like, we wake up and we're not just like, oh, what's going on in the pandemic today? We have to think about it. We have to process it. We often are asked to provide an educated opinion on it, and even recommendations about what to do. That's a different level of responsibility or burden, I will say. It's one that we've chosen, but it's a unique fucking way to experience a pandemic.
Well, I'll argue that I've been doing this for over 12 years, and it's a unique way to live a life, to know that every single thing that's happening in the world, just to be aware of it. It could be very burdensome and stressful to have to pay attention to the news, period. And you have to find, I think, ways and practices. There's a number of times where I felt like I wasn't going to be able to do this for much longer, or there are times now where I feel like I'm getting burnt out. And I'm not saying, I don't want to sound like, I don't know, a victim or a martyr. I like it. I love it, but it can be stressful.
And you just drink more, and then
I smoke weed.
That helps too.
To be clear, like drinking,
we are in this unique category. Maybe we'll call it like the hat trick club, right? We're in the hat trick club where we're experiencing the pandemic, covering the pandemic, and now reporters, like hardcore reporters, don't have this third piece where we're also activists or advocates. and we're trying to raise money for charities or drive people to get rid of bad politicians. The only way you could go further is to hit for the cycle and be like Brooke Baldwin or Chris Cuomo and get the virus too. That's the only way you can go one step further, right? Is to actually cover it, experience it, influence it, and get it.
Listen, I actually wanted to say this to you, and I was going to say this kind of off the air, off the record, but I think that you should be the next person in the media to get COVID-19 because, Paul, I think that I think that everything you're saying about this is true, and I think
nothing you can say after that introduction makes me feel better at all.
Listen, your ability to endure it and to communicate about it, I think, will be really valuable for the rest of us. Now, you'll get it. You'll muddle through it. You'll be okay. You'll do all the right things. You're a soldier.
You'll die.
You're disciplined. You'll be fine.
Or even worse, this is what I tell people. The worst thing when you join the military is not dying. The worst thing is ending up on a fucking ventilator with your mom wiping your ass. Like, that's the worst thing, right? For the rest of your life, right? So, like, I might be fine. I might die, or I might be on a ventilator for many, many, many weeks, and that's fucking terrible for all the people around me.
If that's the case,
you have to come wipe my ass, Pete, if I get COVID.
I will, because I would feel horrible about what I just said, but I don't think that'll be the case with you. I think that you'll be fine. I think that you'll get a little sick, but you'll be one of the, you'll handle it. You're a tough guy.
This is perfect for Rogan's audience. Rogan's audience would love this. Rogan's audience is going to be volunteering to get the virus. It's like the Barstool guys, right? Like, they're out there, running out there to try to volunteer to get the virus to show how tough they are, to say, the businesses are more important than getting the virus. They're not.
Are people really actually volunteering? I haven't heard any of that nonsense. Like saying, I
did a whole show earlier in my podcast about the people who were, this was way back in the day, that were pro-measles people. The people who were volunteering to get measles. They were doing measles parties. That was, remember that? Remember measles? Remember people were afraid of measles? Nobody's scared about measles anymore.
Yeah, I am.
Nobody's scared about AIDS anymore.
I'm still scared of all of them. I don't know who you're speaking for, but all those viruses, you name it, no thank you.
But you're not scared for me. You want me to get all of them so tough. I can be some kind of petri dish for the media industry.
I want you to keep doing your show right through it. I think I
don't want to do that. I love Cuomo. I love Brooke Baldwin. Everybody experiences it.
Think of what it would be for Angry Americans podcast if you got sick and you shared everybody your struggle.
I think there are better ways to build an audience, healthier ways to build. I have a 16-month-old. That's why I'm late for this interview, because the kid never fucking sleeps. Like, if I get COVID, my wife will kill me. Like, I don't have to worry about COVID. If I get it and my wife has to care for our two little ones by herself, she'll kill me.
Yeah.
She'll kill me.
I think
Cuomo's kids are like 16 or whatever. My kids are tiny.
I think that her new husband will take fine care of your sons.
Yeah, it's going to be that guy, Jonathan
Gilliam, who has attacked you on Twitter, is going to raise your kids. That's really what's upsetting.
My nightmare. That's my nightmare.
It really is the worst.
If John Gilliam and Dan Bongino get married and somehow get custody of my children.
Bongino's army came after me.
What is Bongino's army?
I started it. To be fair, I started it. He was going after Shannon Watts of Mom's Demand on Twitter. And I jumped in. I said something like, Shannon Watts gets more death threats in a day than any of you had in your whole life. And who knows if it's true or not. And it was probably
like likelihood is high.
Who am I to jump in there and say such a thing anyway? I'd probably been drinking. Dude, next 2 hours. There it is. That cough right there.
I got the cough now. There it comes. Because I haven't drank enough water, and I'm trying to drink some water right now.
I just got buried for the next 3 days in my mentions by Dan Bongino's people. Because he retweeted.
You know what the worst part
is? He retweeted what I said and quoted it with lib. Just lib.
You know what the worst part is, though? When that happens,
blue check lib.
When that happens, Twitter becomes no longer useful for you. It's like someone disconnecting your phone line or like leaving the phone off the hook in the old days. Like, Twitter becomes no longer useful because all you have is this spew of not just legitimate
My
crazy
mentions
people.
Were filled with your head looks like a dick. Filled with them. Dildo head.
So much physical stuff, right?
Well, so much men get white men I think exclusively get the kind of like homo homophobia, just homoerotic stuff, just calling you gay and you want to suck a dick and all that. Yeah. Women get sexual threats. Obviously Jews and black people get anti-Semitic and racist threats. But white straight guys, we get it insinuated that we want to be gay, which it just like nothing could bother me less. I'd be bothered by a physical 1991
threat. To me, right? Like what we get is a lot of really bad jokes about bald guys. Like we've heard every fucking joke about a bald guy in the world.
Not even. I don't even get that much of that. Usually they'll go for your bald head looks like a dick. Like they'll go deeper. More specific as to what it looks like.
This is going in like the outtakes, right? Because I don't know who wants to hear you and me talk about Dan Bongino marrying John Gilliam and how our heads look like
Do you want to do what I had prepared?
Sure.
Are you ready?
Your show, man. I'm just rolling with it.
I'll do the part I prepared.
That I don't get COVID.
Here it is. Ready?
Yes.
All right, we'll start over. You
can play music for me?
I'll play music. I'll play my show music. All right, everybody. Well, you probably heard this story already, haven't you? Russian intelligence officers have offered bounties to Taliban militants to kill U.S. and coalition forces in Afghanistan over the past year, according to a classified U.S. intelligence assessment. President Trump and administration officials were briefed on the Russian operation in recent months, while the U.S. was in the midst of peace negotiations with the Taliban to end the 18-year war in Afghanistan. President Trump has denied receiving an intelligence briefing on the alleged Russian bounty program, and the White House insisted that Trump still has not been briefed on the matter, and details continue to come out about this. Joining me to talk about it now, author, activist, veteran of the United States Army and the Iraq War, founder and former executive director of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, the president of Righteous Media Incorporated, the host of the Angry Americans podcast, which you must listen to and subscribe, on Twitter at Paul Rieckhoff, drinking a cherry seltzer. Paul? That was a really long fucking intro, and I'm proud of drinking seltzer, man. I'm trying to go against the grain. When we were warming up, you said that you hoped I get the virus so that I could be some kind of, I don't know hero.
What. So hero. Okay. That's the word you're going to use. So I'm trying to stay healthy, man. I mean, I can't drink every fucking night. I think most Americans are drinking every fucking night.
I think a lot.
Whatever amount you're drinking, you're probably wishing you drank less.
Maybe not. I don't know.
Don't criticize me for that, man. Why are you bullying me about my non-drinking?
I'm not. I didn't. That's how you heard it. I was just saying, I was actually...
I heard it like it came out of your mouth. Yes.
Yeah, I was just saying that what you were drinking as to make it seem like it wasn't.
They're not a sponsor, but I have been enjoying Poland Springs Black Cherry. This is their attempt to try to compete with the dominant market share of LaCroix, which could be a whole segment on your show. Is it LaCroix?
We have many of... my wife loves that stuff.
Everybody does. It's like crack cocaine. I mean, it's in everybody's house all around the country. Has there ever been something? It's probably the last time something was this dominant was like Diet Coke.
Maybe.
Or maybe Tab at its heyday when I was a child, right? Like what's infiltrated our homes from a beverage standpoint?
Oh, I got it. It sounds like LaCroix, but it's White Claw.
No.
Yes, it's dominating the market.
That's out there among the people.
These are all ways to not intake sugar, but have a good party.
But if you drink White Claw, 25 years ago you drank Zima.
That's right.
It's the same people.
Or you have celiacs.
Maybe
can't drink beer anymore. So
really,
you still, a friend of mine.
That's you. Is this why you drink White Claw?
No, but I drink White Claw because I enjoy it. I stand by
Bud Light Seltzer. I find to be actually quite refreshing. I like it.
Haven't had it.
I like it. I tried it. I was like trying not to be a hater. I went down to the IGA and I bought a freaking case of it. And now it's like, it kind of feels like healthy alcohol.
Quit bragging. A lot of bragging happening.
Bragging about my IGA trip. Have you been to IGA in the last 5 decades?
Yeah, the elitism just pours out of you the way you pronounce IGA.
Yeah, it's IGA. It's disgusting.
Yeah, that's how they say it in the boondocks where you now live.
Yeah, so now we're going to talk about foreign policy?
Well... So much for the intro.
Where should we begin?
Well, I think that we should begin on how crazy this story is.
Let me start with this.
Okay.
Is it really that crazy? Here's what I'm going to say. Who is fucking surprised by this? Who is legitimately surprised by this. All this outrage in the media. Let's find something to be surprised about that Donald Trump did. This is the guy who just retweeted audio of someone screaming white power.
He might not have heard it. The mic might have been the audio might have been
some
off.
Bullshit excuse, but like, who is really surprised by this? Like, is it more outrageous because it's American troops? That's what's baked into this,
yes!
right? It's like he can kill millions of people of any other type. He can ban Muslims. He can, support the proliferation of a virus that disproportionately kills black people. He can take away women's right to choose. He can attack a bunch of other people. And I guess there's something interesting in this or noble. But for some reason, when some troops in Afghanistan are potentially killed and bounties are put on their head, there's a different level of outrage?
Yes, there is. There is. Because
why?
Because the American military is a sacred cow.
But he fucks us as much as everyone else.
He does not. Yes, but
he
who
fucks
is
us
more,
actually more than everyone else, and nobody gives a shit. Today, I mean, you got me cranked up.
When you say he fucks us, I'm sorry. I thought you meant you and I.
I've had a couple Poland Spring black cherries, and I'm cranked up here. But today,
the veterans community, you mean?
The number of veterans who have had COVID have gone up. I think it's 140% in the last month. Nobody gives a flying shit about that. Really, they don't.
You do. You've been tweeting about it a lot.
Maybe now they do. Nobody wants to cover it. I pass it around to people occasionally. Cuomo will cover it. Matt will cover it. You're always great about it. But what about the 76 veterans who died in the Holyoke Soldiers Home? They were almost all of them were World War II vets.
Yikes.
Like people were at Iwo Jima. They died locked into a hospital because a bunch of morons couldn't keep them safe. Their families couldn't even get to them. They weren't transparent about it. There were guys, they were announcing deaths like 3, 4 a day for weeks, and nobody gave a fuck. So, like, I am outraged, okay, but I'm kind of out of outrage. At this point, I don't want to hear why people are outraged or how this happened. What I want to hear is what the fuck are they going to do about it? And I'm talking about Congress. Like, what is Congress? What is Biden? What are Pelosi going to do right now? And don't tell me vote for Joe Biden in November, because more people are going to die in the meantime. I'm kind of sick of this fake outrage. And I'm a guy who gets called on to be the outrage guy sometimes, pretty often. Have me on TV to talk about why we should be pissed about this fucked up thing happening to our military or our vets. But at what point is it exhaustion? Like, I'm exhausted by it, Pete. I'm sick of this shit. And in those press corps events, they can't really nail him down about anything. They play patty cake with him on a regular basis. I'm kind of over the media who think that, like, Acosta is a tough guy because occasionally he asks a tough question. They should be going for this guy's fucking jugular every day because he's destroying the entire world. Like,
if you were asking the question, or if you were in Congress, what would you do differently, Congressman Rieckhoff?
I would, if I were in Congress, okay, and I were the Speaker of the House, I would be probably launching as many simultaneous articles of impeachment that I possibly could. I would jam him up with, it's a flurry of jabs, haymakers, body shots. Just keep throwing so much shit at him that he can't make time to fuck up more things. Right? Like, bury him in wave after wave. And there must be other technical terms beyond impeachment. There must be other ways to get him out or to tie him up. But tie him up, slow him down, knock him out as much as you possibly can with no mercy, because that's how high the stakes are. I mean, I have the same argument about de Blasio in New York on some levels, because people say, de Blasio is going to be around till next year. We'll have an election. Do you know how much damage de Blasio can do to New York in a year and 3 months? I mean, it's catastrophic.
New York is still there?
Yeah, exactly. Right? So you got me cranked up, Pete. I'm glad you called me up after I put the baby to bed. I got a lot of energy, and I've been drinking some Poland Springs.
Hi, Becky. We're going to need to book a guest tonight who is filled with outrage. Do you know if Paul Rieckhoff is available? Get Rieckhoff. Get Rieckhoff.
It's hit the outrage button. But who the fuck does anything about it, right? Like, really, Pete? What's going to happen from this? What's going to change? And I don't really think much is going to change. And that's what really pisses me off the most.
As a result
I'm as outraged. I'm less outraged. I expect this from Trump. Okay? I'm sick of every elected official who just stands up in front of a camera every day or two and is outraged about some other shit. Like, they're complicit at this point, in my view.
What have you heard from the veterans community about this story? How will the Trump supporting media and Trump supporting veterans, which unfortunately, there are a lot of, how will they spin this one? that the president of the United States had it in his briefing that Russians were paying bounties to the Taliban for each American they killed.
I'm so sick of playing follow the bouncing ball of spin. They're going to say he wasn't briefed or he didn't know or, he only got incomplete information. They'll probably blame the intelligence community. That's usually what they do. Like, this administration is so upside down, right? It's such a bizarro world that a Republican administration can routinely attack the American intelligence agencies and the FBI and the military. Right? Like on a regular basis, he is in a battle with Admiral McRaven, Colin Powell. His acting chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Milley, said that he apologized to going to the church. Remember when he was in uniform, right? Milley and Esper, the Secretary of Defense, got pulled into this. Esper said he thought he was going to see a bathroom. He said he thought he was going to see a bathroom that was boarded up. Like, what level of stupidity do we tolerate here? That guy should fucking resign. If he doesn't resign, he should be removed. Milley should resign in disgrace. If he doesn't, he should be removed. Like, stop accepting apologies for things that are absolutely unacceptable, right? I mean, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs actually went against the president, and somehow he survived so far, right?
He apologized, right?
He did apologize, and he said, I should not have allowed myself to have been politicized. But you know what he didn't do, Pete? He didn't blame the president, and he should have. He should have said, I follow my commander-in-chief, and my commander-in-chief told me to come somewhere, so I went there, and then he pushed me into crazy town. And I am resigning because the president shouldn't do that to me or to anyone else. That's what he should have done, in my view. That would have been the noble thing to do.
This is the same president, by the way, who vindicated and rewarded Navy SEAL who had murdered innocent civilians. You were talking about that on your podcast a lot. You're obviously outraged about that. He rewards horrible people and punishes heroes.
Yeah. I mean, he goes against every norm.
And ignores bounties for military.
Like, how long ago did he attack a Gold Star family? 3 years ago? How long ago did he shit on John McCain and say that, I don't like guys who don't get captured? That was like 2.5 years ago.
Oh, longer.
Who is surprised by this? Every time someone calls up and gets outraged or goes on TV, my question is, what the fuck are you doing about it? Don't tell me you're outraged. Don't repeat what's obvious to us. If you can offer some level of analytical insight that illuminates the situation for us, great. But all I want to hear is action.
Let me just phrase it one more time differently to you to see if I can keep the outrage going. The commander-in-chief of the United States military, the most powerful military in the world, knew that a hostile foreign power was incentivizing another hostile foreign power where Americans were serving with cash to kill Americans. The president did nothing with that information.
Take him out in handcuffs. Where are the handcuffs, right? Like, why is it, how much damage does he have to do, right? Really? Like at what level, we used to say all the time, Pete, babies, puppies, and vets. Babies, puppies, and vets are kind of the three sacred groups in politics. You don't cross babies, puppies, and vets, or it's political suicide, right? This guy fucking screws over vets, screws over the military. I mean, if there were babies to screw over, he'd do it too. But
he ate a baby last week, Trump. Nobody said anything. Not one question.
Yeah.
That was a delicious baby.
It's at the point now where I really am exhausted, Pete, because I don't think people have fully I think that the response to the pandemic is one of the worst catastrophes from a foreign policy, national security, domestic security standpoint we've ever seen. It's worse than Vietnam, in my view. Okay, long term, it will be worse to our country, more damaging than Vietnam was. The only thing that Trump can do worse, in my opinion, okay, is some kind of a conflict involving nukes. That's it. Like that's only. Like, so at what point? So let's say he gets into a shooting nuke war with the North Koreans. Then what's going to happen? Is Mitch McConnell going to go, oh, we're going to contemplate it, and Pelosi's going to say, see, I told you. And then they're going to say, vote for Biden. Cincinnati is gone. L.A. is gone. Miami's gone. And they're going to say, you know what? Just hang around to the election.
What if an asteroid is hurtling towards Washington, D.C.? No, not Washington. Philadelphia. No, L.A. Okay? And
do you know I like L.A. more than Philadelphia?
No, I just know that it's further from Trump, and he thinks he can survive it. And the military says, listen, we can nuke that, no problem, and save the planet. And Trump says no or doesn't give the order, like, could that be worse, allowing an asteroid to strike L.A.? Could that be worse?
It would depend on the size of the asteroid and the blast radius. But in general, I think that, mutual destruction, assuming that if we fire a nuke, the others will fire the nukes, and then a bunch of people fire nukes, right? I mean, by the end of this, everybody could be shooting nukes. I think, based off my expert analysis and frequent watching of sci-fi movies, I think that the nuke apocalypse is worse than the asteroid.
Fair enough.
Unless it's the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs, which my 4-year-old asks about all the time, and I really don't have the answer.
Do you tell him that asteroid is named Trump?
No, but he doesn't like Trump. And he keeps telling me, I ask him why. And his best comparison is that he's like the Grinch. He says to me, he's like the Grinch. He's mean. He's not nice. And that is his immediate, not programmed, not influenced. He just made the connection that Trump most reminds him of the Grinch, who in his world is kind of like the most evil person.
Well,
because I don't let him watch really fucked up shit.
Given that, I think it's crazy what your son actually believes and supports Mike Pence. How do you explain that? He's like Pence, on the other hand.
Look, remember those people, Pete, who used to say, oh, it would be so much worse with Pence. Do you think they still believe that now?
I wonder. I don't know.
Because there is some degree of stability. Right? Like Pence, you could argue, has, diabolical plans.
Pence doesn't know how to be a zookeeper the way Trump does. Like Pence would just be an extreme right-wing policy
guy. But he'd be predictable, right? There'd be some level of consistency. He would try
erratic,
not to intentionally blow things up.
He would listen to some people and
He would give some, because I think he does believe in God, and he probably is a little bit worried about hell.
Yeah, he believes in a weird kind of God.
And so there's some kind of a guardrail for Mike Pence. There's no guardrail for Donald Trump, to include bounties for troops. But here's the real deal, man. This is a practical point. If this is even considered as something that's in play, bounties are flying all over the world right now. Right? Like anybody who was worried that the CIA might find out and the president or the United States military apparatus might come for you, there are bounties flying everywhere for our troops that are in Somalia, that are in, Afghanistan, our troops that are in the DMZ in Korea, right? Like if you're Kim Jong-un, you're like, yo, everybody, $500 for every American. Nothing's going to happen. Trump's not going to do anything. So it puts every one of our troops in danger immediately around the world. So that's the no shit, right? Is that it's like, hey, everything is fair game. Trump is open to everything, even if it's misinformation. Even if it's folks who get this third and fourth hand from some fucked up media source, it will come out that everything is for sale in America.
Yeah.
Everything.
That's a really important point. That is probably the best way to describe the Trump presidency. It's like going on a business sale. He will sell every piece of America, every piece of our social fabric, our history, our property, our natural resources.
His daughter, his kids, he'll put it all on the block, man. Really, right? He doesn't give a fuck about his kids. He's like,
listen.
He doesn't give a fuck about his daughter. He'll put them all out there for
you can drill in Yosemite. You can drill all of Yosemite. You don't want to do it? Okay, you know what else? You can have Barron. Okay? You have Yosemite and Ivanka. Okay, take Ivanka. He would, and nobody'd be surprised.
Yeah, but so what happens now, Pete? Like, let's play this out, right? So we get outraged for a couple of days. Maybe there's a congressional investigation. It takes a couple of weeks. Then August comes, by the way. Congress shuts down even more. So maybe we have hearings in September. And then what? Maybe there are articles of impeachment.
Well, Congress shouldn't shut down.
You know what? Why should we put it's October. The election's almost here. Yeah. No articles of impeachment. Like, how deep in the cookie jar does his hand have to be for there to be any accountability?
I asked you earlier, what would Congressman Paul Rieckhoff say? Well, what would if
he would resign and say, I don't want to be a fucking congressman. How did I get this shitty job? That's what he would say. That's what he would say.
Didn't you encourage me to run? What about
Yes, I encourage you to run.
What about if you were White House press corps member Paul Rieckhoff? You were saying that the media with access to the president and his spokespeople aren't asking the right questions. What would you ask? I've got one if you don't have one.
Please, dealer's choice. Go ahead.
How do you feel about Trump supporters who believe in QAnon conspiracy theories, specifically that Democrats are pedophiles protecting pedophile rings? What does the president want to say about that? His supporters of that, I think when you went off on your rant about they should be grilling him, you were talking about all these issues that I think, all these horrible things that Trump has done. I think he should be asked to answer for what his supporters believe and think. And a frighteningly large percentage, I now believe, of his supporters believe, Paul, in the craziest shit you could ever imagine, and most of which you can't imagine.
I appreciate the creativity of that question, but it's not a fatal wound. Okay, like if this is Mortal Kombat,
go ahead.
That's not a kill move. Okay?
Go ahead with your fatal wound question.
If you ask him to defend his people, that's like too far away from him. I would go more along the lines of, you are a dishonorable person that has disgraced this entire country.
That's not a White House.
Will you please resign right now?
That's not
and save us the
something
pain?
a Washington Post correspondent can say.
Can I please take you out in handcuffs right now? That would be the question.
Would
it be okay with you? You'll get great ratings. Can we just end this now and take you out in handcuffs, please? I think this is serious. I haven't said this on too many places, Pete, but I think this is actually important. I think for us as a nation to fully regain our standing in the world and our true credibility, he has to go to jail.
When has it?
Has to go to jail. In Iraq, they hung Saddam Hussein. They hanged Saddam Hussein.
When is
in other countries, there is a death penalty for the level of damage that has been done to a country. We have to have this guy in handcuffs to have a hope of turning around the way we're viewed in the world, to be a nation of laws. At some point, he's got to be in handcuffs.
He'll never be in handcuffs.
He's got to get the bracelets, man. Even Bongino knows what that is. Get Bongino's bracelets and put them on him.
I don't think that's ever going to happen, because in the history of America, no president ever really gets the consequences.
In the history of America, we could say in the history of America, no president has ever everything that Trump did this week, right? Like every week he does shit that no president in the history of America has done.
Right, but about a high percentage of Americans fully support all the crimes he's committing.
How are you going to edit all this?
This is a lot. It's too late. Too late to edit.
This is a lot. You're just going to put the whole thing up?
Yeah, why not?
What are you drinking right now?
Whiskey. It's a podcast.
Kind of whiskey?
It's a podcast. So people.
But let's talk about something that people want to hear. What kind of whiskey?
Everybody wants to hear what we've been talking about. This is good.
What kind of whiskey?
A listener bought this for me.
I can't see it. Is that Talisker?
It's
the weird Zoom thing. When you hold it up to the camera, I can't see anything.
It's the Belvine. The Belvine.
Oh, it's Belvine. That's good.
Belvine Double Wood.
That's really good.
This was matured in 2 distinct casks and then aged 12 years.
They should be a sponsor of this podcast, because you just gave them a tremendous endorsement. And you reminded me that I like that whiskey.
They should at least send me a bottle.
They absolutely should. I recommend Uncle Nearest. Uncle Nearest has been a supporter of my podcast.
Is that right? What is that?
It is. Jeffrey Wright introduced me to Uncle Nearest.
The actor Jeffrey Wright?
Yes, after Nearest Green. Nearest Green is, I believe, the first African-American in American history to ever be named a master distiller. He was a former slave who eventually taught Jack Daniels how to make whiskey, and Jack Daniels basically stole the story, and that's how
Jack Daniels is a white guy who learned how to make whiskey from a black guy?
Yeah. And Nearest Green is the black guy he learned how to make whiskey from.
Wow.
And even more so, like, the whiskey's fucking awesome.
I gotta get some.
And it's really fantastic. And if you really want to see the difference, and like, I like Jack Daniels. I like Jack Daniels a lot more when I was younger and broker. Now I don't have much more money, but at least I have better taste. And this stuff is so much better.
Well, you're gonna hate my Evan Williams.
Huh?
You're gonna hate my Evan Williams bottle.
No, I love. There's no bad whiskey. I mean,
Let's do this then to wrap it up. Tell people about your podcast, Angry Americans, because you just had a great episode, your last episode.
It's really been going well. I'm thankful to all of your listeners who've been supporting it. Our theme is, if you're not angry, you're not paying attention. If you've listened to even 3 seconds of this conversation, you probably realize that there's a lot to be angry about. We get into all the issues across the country that have people angry. Or should have people angry. We always have a focus on national security, defense, foreign policy, first responders. And I interview and have conversations with inspiring, important, and/or iconic guests, ranging from Jeffrey Wright, who came on. Awesome episode. I had Ron Perlman on a couple weeks ago, fresh off his Twitter battle with Matt Gaetz and Ted Cruz.
That was right after that.
And we did a special Pride episode just now with Charlotte Clymer, who is an Army vet who is now one of the most powerful trans activists in America. If you're on Twitter and following Pete, you've probably seen Charlotte at some point. But it's a fun show. We mix in a lot of sports and culture and music, and it's also independent. You know, it's an independent media show. It's an independent political show. We got as high as number 4, I understand, back in April on the podcast charts, but that was mostly thanks to Jeffrey Wright, who I think Westworld was coming out at that time. So thank you, Jeffrey Wright. He gets an informal production credit. That's the show. AngryAmericans.us. You get it everywhere you get pods. Pete Dominic has been a great inspiration and friend. Thank you for even asking.
There you go. There you go. That's it. Angry Americans, wherever you get your pods, and check Paul out. Follow him on Twitter.
If you're not angry, you're not paying attention. And if you listen to Pete, you have good reason to be angry because he's filling your life with information and making you aware in ways you should appreciate and stay vigilant, is what we say on my show a lot.
You're very kind. Thank you for joining me tonight. I love you, Paul Rieckhoff.
Thank you for waiting up until after I got the baby to bed and I was able to find a cold Poland Springs black cherry.
Happy to. Anytime,
You're
buddy.
a good man. I love your pod. I love your show. You're rocking it.
Same back at you, buddy. Thank you. Paul Rieckhoff, everybody. Check out his show. And he gets great guests, and he's great on Twitter. And that conversation was all over the place, and I loved it. I hope you did too. All right, final guest of today's show, good friend of mine who is a longtime listener on Twitter at Bill B in DC. If you're a subscriber, a longtime listener, you're probably familiar with Bill and his voice and his opinions on things. I always love talking to this guy. I just think he's thoughtful and intelligent, and I wanted to reach out to somebody to talk to them about the idea of DC statehood. And I just thought, since I know Bill so well, and since he's so passionate and knows a lot about it, that he would be a great guy to talk about it with. And you know what? He was. We also talked about this issue that I just talked to Paul Rieckhoff about the bounties on American members of the military. He has some really thoughtful things to say about that as well. Here now, my conversation with our friend Bill B in D.C. right now. I got him now, Bill B in D.C. It's been a long time since we talked, and a couple of things I want to talk with you about today. As always, I appreciate you joining me. But first of all, I should have mentioned this before I started taping because maybe it's too personal, but your son has left you for the first time since the pandemic started. Are you okay?
I am so ecstatic. I can't even begin to describe how happy I am. He is in a martial arts day camp every day this week, and it is heaven.
It's an interesting thing that a lot of parents are going through where their kids are going off and doing any number of things for the first time since we've been locked down. And of course, that's a reprieve for a lot of parents, but it's also a big deal thing, which is why I bring it up. Like, a lot of people are experiencing their kids, or the kids are experiencing going out and being away from their parents for the first time. What a strange transition that is, because it's not like the first time they've ever done it. It's the first time they've done it since we locked down. And they must be, I know my kids are desperate to be with their friends and have been really celebrating it.
Yeah, we took our kid to a, socially distanced picnic with just one other family in a backyard. Everybody had plenty of room. And my son and the boy, who are friends, had this great time, really fun time last weekend. And then as we were walking home at, way too late at night, my son was incredibly depressed. And I said, "What the hell's the matter with you? You just had such a fun time." Yeah. And he goes, "Yeah. And now it's over. I don't know when I'm going to do that again." And I was like, wow, and my son is a super social, funny kid, loves society. He loves other people. He's like great with adults. You've met him when you were super baked. And
he accused me of being high. I couldn't even believe it. Oh, no, wait, that was you.
and
I was.
But the fact that he got depressed almost immediately after hanging out with somebody for 4 hours.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Right?
It makes a lot of sense because he gets a taste of something and it's taken from him. That's as a kid. How old is he now?
He's 8.
Yeah, that's really understandable. In our experience, my daughter went away, my 15-year-old, with 5 of her friends for the first time ever, which is always a coming of age, important experience. But my fear wasn't drinking and sex. And it's not. And it continues not to be, because for reasons we could go into another time. But my fear is still the fact I didn't want her to go. I didn't want her to go to, this is LBI, you're from Jersey, to the beach and stay in a hotel. And my wife and my daughter, I lost that fight, but it sucks to be concerned that it sucks to be against letting my adolescent teenager have her adolescence for that reason. That's tough.
Yeah, I mean,
because everybody knows how great that is. The beach when you're a teenager, summer when you're a teenager.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, it's hard. I mean, so I just started allowing my kid to go to the local store to pick up a gallon of milk or whatever himself.
What is it, 1950?
Well, he's not buying me cigarettes. He's buying milk. So
who's buying milk?
Oh, well,
cow milk?
You wouldn't know about that in your liberal enclave. But us real Americans buy milk. But I get that feeling much more strongly than I did before of like, I hope he has his mask on in the store.
Right.
I hope, I'm more worried about that than him being like hijacked by something.
Right. Hit by a car or kidnapped. Right. Yeah. It's a weird thing to be, you have your normal concerns as a parent and you try to balance them. You try not to be a helicopter parent. You try to not let fear motivate your parenting, but this and then a new fear arises and you have to try to balance that one too. And that's, I think, challenging for a lot of parents. So good that you and I are talking about it on tape so that other people can relate to it and understand you're not alone. All right, moving on to another really important issue that you wanted to, of course, talk with me about, that I want to talk with you about, I should say, which is the story that the Russian intelligence was paying the Taliban money, cash money, for any American military member that they killed in Afghanistan. Before we get to did Trump know, did Trump not know, and how his reaction, the United States of America has done this with guerrilla groups, insurgents groups from Central America to the Middle East, haven't they?
Yes, but not against another great power.
Well, we paid the Mujahideen to kill the Russians. We did the exact same thing, did we not?
I mean, not on a bounty system for killing individuals, but we certainly financed the Mujahideen fighting the Russians, definitely.
Just to be clear, the fact that they're paying the Taliban to kill Americans is not uncommon. It's not something America hasn't done.
Right. I would agree with that.
Okay.
Yes.
The outrage comes in the fact that the American president may have known this and done nothing about it. That's where the outrage comes from. That is the more unprecedented thing, I would imagine.
Correct, definitely. And more than that, he didn't do something about it. He was giving the Russian president foreign policy wins after he found out. And that's the part that really blows people away. He was, he tried to invite Putin to the G7 after he was briefed on it, or after he should have been briefed. Let's give him the widest benefit of the doubt possible.
NPR is reporting that Trump knew this and still offered Putin a hand job. Do you believe that reporting?
I think that's probably absolutely true, at least metaphorically.
I hear you, but let's just argue about maybe not the reporting. Okay, how does this work? The New York Times had this first. Other outlets, including the Washington Post, have also had it. But what we don't know, what the New York Times reporting, at least my understanding, and I've read the article I think twice now, is that it was included in one of his briefings, and the New York Times reporters were told that it was known at the highest levels of the administration. What is highest levels of the State Department?
It would be Mike Pompeo
or the Justice Department.
It would be Mike Pompeo. It would be the cabinet would know.
Okay, so Kayleigh McEnany, the president's spokesman, and the president himself said, I was never briefed because the intel agencies did not have a consensus. That's believable.
Not this time. Not this time.
Why not?
Because you don't put it in the PDB if you're disagreeing about it in any significant way, number one. Number two, there's tons of reporting that the French, the British, the Germans, probably the fucking Bulgarians all knew about it. And there's lots of reason to know that is true as well. That it's one thing to say, oh, everybody else knew. But the unit that was doing it is Unit 29155. These are the chaps from the GRU who tried to kill Skripal in Russia. The guys who poison people with incredibly bad poisons. It's the same people. So this is an organization. It's Russian military intelligence. They're not, I would say, they do crazy things, but they're not the best tradecraft in the world. And of course, because they've done crazy things, they're incredibly scrutinized. So you had the guys from the most scrutinized, almost sloppiest Russian intelligence wet work group going to Afghanistan and basically walking around and saying, "Hey guys, bring me an American body, and we'll give you money for it."
Wet work is a code. It's an intel code for killing, assassinating
wet people.
Work.
So if this was some sort of weird thing, it was Turkmenistan operatives doing blah blah blah, and you only hear about it from one place. Okay, maybe. But they never would have put it in the PDB. They never, ever, in the President's Daily Briefing, which was where it was. And the way that McEnany phrases it's really interesting. She says things like he was not told or he didn't hear it. It was they're trying to get to the point or try to make the claim that the briefer didn't read it out loud. That's what they're aiming for. If you look at anyone or know anyone who's ever been involved in this process, it is a very set thing. Things like this, like danger to American servicemen of this nature, go straight to the top, straight away. There's no, well, maybe they're trying to kill American troops. Who knows? That goes straight to the top. So there is not. I think the best argument you can make for Trump is possibly he was too stupid to understand what the fuck they were telling him. Possibly, and I think that's a very strained thing. I think. Really realistically is that, oh, and by the way, let me point something else out. Every time Trump went to do something that was positive for Putin, like, for instance, pulling out 9,500 troops from Germany, right? Things like this would come up again.
What do you mean? Right? Things like this would come up again? What do you mean?
So the president says, I want to pull out 9,500 troops from Germany.
Right.
Well, anyone on the Russia
desk. That benefits Russia.
What's that?
That benefits Russia is what you're into.
Because it benefits Russia and because they want to protect him politically. His briefers would say, okay, but you got to be aware of this because they would look bad together. Right? There's strategy, at least on some rudimentary level going on, even in the Trump administration.
Well, what about the idea that that there isn't potentially a consensus on the intelligence about the GRU paying the Taliban?
That is White House propaganda.
You think that? Well, what makes you think that? I mean, why trust any intelligence agency? And that's Trump has done a good job. He's not wrong when he disparages certain intel agencies for getting WMD wrong. I mean, I'm not going to give him any benefit for that because we were disparaging him and he bought the war in Iraq before.
The WMD story was wrong because Dick Cheney and the political people forced the agencies to go with that story. It wasn't the WMD story didn't rise up out of the agencies by them just being mistaken and not figuring stuff out. Well, they were told that's what the story is going to be, and we're going to crush you until you give that story. And even then, they didn't all do it. There's no benefit at all in any way for the CIA or anyone else to misreport something like this. It's a high-profile thing. It goes straight to the top. If you fuck it up, you lose your career. And something you'll notice, Gene Haspel, is it Gene Haspel? Haspel, anyway.
Yep.
Not saying a word.
Well, should the intel agencies in this case have to now come out publicly and state what they do or don't know? Not necessarily how they gathered the information, but what they do or don't know. Therefore, at least to a congressional oversight committee, at least to create a sense of how much they are or are not in a consensus on this intelligence. Shouldn't they have to tell Congress, thusly the American public, what they know? How big of a deal is bounties on American soldiers in Afghanistan? Right. It's a big deal.
Yeah. Here's what would make sense. And what will the House is going to ask for this? Trust me, they're already in the process. The House wants to know, and the CIA will be willing to do it. Guess what's going to happen?
What?
The administration won't let the CIA go up and
right. We've seen that. We've seen that song before. Yeah. Right.
They're not these guys. These guys. It's not the CIA. In fact, the White House is probably furious with the CIA that this even came out. This is. And by the way, the bigger story, forget about whether we know we don't have the nth certainty it's true. Forget about the fact that maybe it wasn't in the PDB. Maybe by some bizarre confluence of events, Trump didn't hear about it. Have you noticed what Trump is not doing now? He's not making any preparations at all to react to it in any way.
Well, because it might not be true. That's what he'll say. I don't know if it's true. There's no consensus. That's what they're saying.
There's not sure. You would be saying, okay, we are going to dig into this and find out. Is he even doing that? Not at all. You wouldn't, I mean, if you you thought it might be true and you were president of the United States, what would you do, Pete? You'd be like, God damn it, just clear the decks. Let's find out if this is true. And if somebody did it, we're going to crush them.
What's this? Where does the phrase, what did he know and when did he know it come from? Is that just
that's Watergate.
Is that a Watergate thing or is it just any kind of crime?
I think Watergate set it in stone, but who knows?
But how do you prove when someone, in this case, the President of the United States, learned of information? I'm reminded of of Bush being given a PDB that stated, and Richard Clark talked all about this, a former head of what counterterrorism agency, I forget, that bin Laden was determined to strike within the United States. That became a huge thing because I don't think Bush ever denied learning that. It was just a matter of that he didn't do anything about it.
That's right. He did not deny getting it, they basically said things like, well, the Clinton administration wasn't quite clear enough about what they meant, which was all bullshit, whatever. But what the Bush administration did with that was kind of within the normal bounds of, okay, we don't want to have to eat this, that we screwed up so terribly. And he partly got away with it because people liked his reaction at first after 9/11.
Yeah.
But this is a similar situation in that, it's similar, it's different. It's similar in that they both completely missed something of extreme import to American interests. But the reason why they missed it is totally different. The Bush people were arrogant, cocky, and they actually were all caught up on the idea of intermediate ballistic missiles. That was their obsession when they came into office. And if you want to die of boredom, I can explain that to you for 2 hours. But the Trump reason for missing is not because he was obsessed with something else. The reason he's missed it, and even more so that he's not doing anything about it, is because it's Vladimir Putin.
Right. Okay, let me ask you one more question. Yeah. Yep. And let me ask you one more question that I really wanted to talk with you about. I mean, you and I are well informed on these national security things. We have opinions on it, but we're not experts. You are, however, an expert on a lot of things DC. You are, after all, Bill B in DC. And I wondered if you could give me, in a few minutes here, kind of a history and an understanding of DC statehood, because I still don't get this, and I have no idea how I feel about it. And I'm really completely ignorant to the concept of it, if we should do it, if we shouldn't do it, if people in D.C. support it, if they don't support it, the arguments for and against. But it has come up again. Why has it come up most recently?
Honestly, it's come up because of George Floyd's murder, actually, ironically. The protests here brought it back up very rapidly in a way that no one could have expected.
And the idea, help me understand the concept, the concern. Democrats would love, both parties probably would love another state to electoral votes if they could guarantee those electoral votes would go to them. Is that fair to say?
Right.
Like if you could add a state and you knew that state was going to vote for Republicans or Democrats, you'd be for that state being added, right?
Well, both parties have done that. I mean, it's part of the reason that the Republicans added so many Western states back in the first half of the 20th century.
Is that right? Is there a lot of history to that?
Yeah, that's why you have Wyomings and North Dakotas and South Dakotas, et cetera. They were all Republican states or Republican voters that became states very quickly. I mean, and that's a kind of a good way to talk about the sort of scale and the mismeasurement that goes on here of what should or shouldn't be a state. DC has more population, 700,000 people than, I forget, 6 or 7 states already. On top of that, DC contributes more to the federal treasury in the terms of taxes people pay to the federal government than 22 states below it.
Wow.
The reason DC is not a state, or was not a state initially, was that the early government of the United States was scared to death that you would have a city like London or Paris that basically had incredible power because it was the capital and it also was a voting adjunct of that capital. Well, so they made the District of Columbia, which was supposed to be outside of the sort of norm of state politics. Then what happens really interesting. The city becomes more African American. Civil War comes around. After the Civil War, the city becomes more African American. And guess what people in DC did? They voted to get rid of their own representatives. There was a city council and a mayor and all that sort of thing. But what had happened is that the District of Columbia had become majority African American. And after the Civil War, white voters did not want to live in a place that had the potential for African Americans being in charge of them. And so they literally did away with representative government just within the district. Forget about its national representation. Is that something you were aware of?
No, I'm not aware of any of this. I'm not aware of any of the arguments. I'm not aware of any, I really am interested in it. And why can't DC just be absorbed by Maryland or Virginia, become part of that?
I'll get to that. So for the next 80 or 90 years, DC was run by someone appointed by the federal government, by Congress, until 1972, like within your lifetime. There was then a mayor and a city council. And this is a long way to answer your question about why DC cannot just retrocede into Maryland or wherever. When DC first got its first mayor, he was African American, Mayor Washington, ironically. And a congressman from, I want to say Maryland, who ran the District of Columbia committee on the Hill, objected to the fact that the DC mayor, by statute, was supposed to get some information and that he asked for it. So he sent him a truck full of watermelons in reply. Yeah. So all of this is to say that DC has this really long, really potent, really rough history of racism and of being disregarded by the federal government and a real identity in things like go-go music, which most people have never heard of, in this sort of the neighborhoods and the black culture that's here that's very, very different from black culture in Baltimore or in Richmond. And DC has an identity, and it would be giving up that identity, and it would be giving up that political identity in particular if we went back to Maryland. And by the way, we have 700,000 people. There's states with fewer people who happen to be all white that have 2 senators.
Right.
Why should we?
Well,
what's wrong with us? What makes us different?
And even more importantly than the electoral votes or statehood is that you have no representation in Congress, which is why the license plates say taxation without representation. Is that right?
Yeah. And so, that should be clear to people. Thank you for mentioning that. I get affected by every federal decision, but I don't have any say in my taxes. We have 1 non-voting member in the House. That's it. And I don't have the choice of paying that federal tax, of course. I have to pay it. That's it. It's exactly what we fought the revolution for. We didn't just fight the revolution for some representation. We fought the revolution for equal representation. There were continental congresses that were under the British in America before the revolution. And the British were like, what's the problem? You have some representation. But in the end, when the British wanted to tell us what we could or couldn't do, they could. And that's bullshit. And why in God's name would a country founded on that allow its capital city to have 700,000 people without those rights? And the answer, of course, is because mostly they are brown and black. That's the bottom line. And you can hear that in Tom Cotton's speech the other day, where he talks about how Wyoming is full of laborers and working men, and he describes effectively the white working class. And he's saying something to his people, which is that basically, if you're brown and work in an office in Washington, D.C., you're not as American as the guy in Wyoming. So there's a lot of reasons to not compromise here.
What is the likelihood of D.C. becoming a state?
Am I in favor of it?
No. Oh, are you in favor of it?
I'm intensely in favor of it. Yes.
What is the opinion of Washington D.C. residents, voters, taxpayers, generally speaking? Do they overwhelmingly want?
It was 60-40 in favor before, but when Trump now showed that he could use the military in our streets without our consent in any way, there's no governor to say no to that. When he has the right legally to take control of our police department and use them in any way he wants to, when he can tear gas a church and take over a city street so he can hold up a Bible, now you're goddamn right. 100% of the city wants to be its own state. Because if we were a state, we could say no to that.
What is the likelihood of D.C. becoming a state?
Well, at this point, you would need a vote in the Senate in favor, which means that in the House, it's already passed. I believe they've already done the State House chunk of this. So really, you would need the filibuster to be killed, and you would need the Senate then to vote for it. And if that happened, D.C. could have senators at the end of next year.
All right. Great conversation. I got to run, pick up my daughter.
Cheers.
Always love to hear from you, pal. Thank you very much for letting me tape this. Bill B in D.C., everybody. All right. That is it. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Paul Rieckhoff. And, of course, thank you, Eric Segall. But most importantly, thank all of you who support this podcast with a paid subscription. If you haven't signed up already, then hey, maybe today is your day. I want to give a shout out to both, Jason Oliver, who signed up yesterday for $10 a month with a paid subscription. Hi, Jason. Thank you so much. Really looking forward to meeting you and hearing more about you and your life. I appreciate it. As well as Pam Helmstetter. Pam, thank you very much. I'm sorry to all of you. She's also paying $10 for a monthly subscription. If you haven't, you could consider raising your subscription. Every day, 5 days a week, I'm pumping out the podcast, getting 2-3 guests. And Thursday, we're taking off, though. I do want to give people a heads up. We're going to head up to Friends in Cape Cod, Nantucket specifically. And maybe I don't do a podcast every day next week. And maybe I take my first vacation since last year. I don't know. I doubt it. I think I'm probably going to end up putting out at least one interview, one guest a day. We'll see. I hope that you'll be understanding if I decide to do that and spend some time with the girls up there hanging out. But that remains to be seen. I got some great guests booked for the rest of the week, so we will see about that. I will talk to you tomorrow right here because I'm here every day. You're not alone. I'm right here with you, and I love you, and I appreciate your support. Thank you.